Good evening, everybody, and welcome to JWA's Quarantine Book Talks. I am Judith Rosenbaum of the Jewish Women's Archive. I am really glad to be back here tonight with you for the second session of our winter series. Please say hello in the chat box. Please make sure to chat to everyone so we can see who you are and where you're from. Also, please drop any questions throughout the program in the chat box and we'll bring them in. We are so glad to be able to continue offering this program and growing this community, and I want to thank Judaism Unbound for their partnership. Before I introduce our featured author for this evening, I want to say just a few words about JWA for anyone who is new to us. We are a digital archive that helps expand the Jewish narrative by documenting and sharing Jewish women's stories and the issues and topics that are important to us. We believe that uncovering a more diverse story helps us understand the world that we live in and helps us create a better future. So thank you for joining us in that project. The Quarantine Book Talks are just one aspect of JWA's work. There's so much more that we do. Please visit us at jwa.org to explore the full range of projects and resources that we offer. I am so delighted tonight to welcome Ariella Elovic, who is an illustrator living and working in New York City. She is the author of Cheeky, a Head-to-Toe Memoir, and the founder of the Cheeky blog, an online platform through which she seeks to combat the shame so many of us feel in relation to our bodies. Her work has been featured in many places, including The New Yorker, Alma, Teen Vogue, and BuzzFeed. Welcome, Ariella. So excited to have you with us tonight.
So happy to be with you.
I really loved your book. It was so much fun to read. And it was the kind of book that as I was going through it, I just was thinking on every page of like a different person that I wanted to buy it for and talk about it with. So many of the topics that you cover are just felt like they were just pulled out of so many conversations that I've had with my friends. So how did you come to create this book and all the projects around it? I know it grew out of your Instagram account. How did you get started?
Well, I'm so happy to hear that you love the book and for the specific reason that you loved it, because that's really what made Cheeky happen, was kind of realizing how powerful and joyful it was to have a group of people to talk about your body with, and not just your body, but everything going on in and around your body. And kind of what kind of prompted the idea for it is I moved to New York City after I graduated from college in St. Louis. And, through my college years, I lost touch with this very close group of friends that I had at camp that I call the Yentas, who I write about in the book. They're based on real people. And after my first year in New York, like it often happens with people you go to camp with, if you go to camp, they start coming to New York. That's kind of a general place that I feel like a lot of folks from my camp in New Hampshire fled to at some point in time. And I reconnected with them actually at a camp reunion that was held for alumni. And one night I had mentioned that I was having trouble going to the bathroom, and one of my friends, one of the Yentas, said, "Hey, I use this powder, you should try it." And a whole conversation came up, and it just was like we never left. And in New York, when I started reconnecting with them, I felt myself coming back to myself. It was just this really powerful feeling. And no matter what terrible day I might have had or frustrating thing I was going through, just being able to sit with these women and talk about the weird fluids coming out of our body or the hairs that were sprouting in places we never thought it would happen, it just brought me so much joy and helped me really root into myself, also at a time when I was trying to date people online and kind of making myself vulnerable in a lot of new ways and new jobs, meeting new people, and having this core group that kind of, again, helps you root into yourself was so empowering and so invaluable to me. And I wanted to find a way to kind of replicate that community online, because I felt like it was so missing from, the larger conversations that were going on. Just blatant, just honest conversations about our bodies, especially in a space where I think we try to perfect ourselves or present a version of ourselves that might not be the most real. And so when I started Cheeky on Instagram, I started to realize, kind of a fake it till you make it type feeling of, how could I ever talk about my body in this way, but kind of being disconnected from it and illustrating it and kind of, leaning into how shocking can I be, it slowly became my mindset of, so what if I have stretch marks. So yeah, that's how the Instagram happened, and it was very clear that people loved talking about this stuff. So I thought it would be, healing for me and helpful for other people to put it in a framework of growing up and going through those waves of insecurity and empowerment and community that, make living in a body much more fun, I guess.
Well, your book definitely brings so much joy to that project. And it's really interesting also to hear about your, wanting to take advantage of what's possible in a social media space. We hear so much about Instagram being sort of dangerous for women, especially for young women. And I love the idea of using it as a place where you can also change what kind of conversation is happening there. And it is really interesting to think that like maybe sort of doing it in a different media. I mean, it's still visual, but doing it through illustration as opposed to photographs. Like I see how much people curate themselves in photographs, but somehow painting feels like a little bit of a different way. Did it feel to you like that opened up the possibility of making Instagram work differently?
Yeah, and I think with image, what's really fun is you can there's a whole nother layer of joy you can bring into it. Like in the book, I have one of my armpits, my left armpit, for some reason sweats a lot more than the other, and it's smellier. So I created this little character called Pete the Pit, who's like my little hairy left armpit. And so I think when there's room to play, at least it helps me have more fun with what's going on with my body. I can create characters, I could create like musical numbers. And I think that it helps to have fun, more so than just looking at photos, which is very empowering too. But I think there's a personality you can bring when it's illustrated.
Right. And your work is so colorful and just very much alive, very vibrant.
Thank you.
Let's see a little piece. Show us a section,
Yeah.
do a little reading, and then we can talk a little bit about some of it so that everyone has a chance to delve in.
So I'm going to share my screen. Okay. So I've got an excerpt here from the boobs chapter. These are my boobs, soulful and knowing. I've never named them and do not wish to, but they definitely have personality. My boobs started making themselves known when I was in 4th grade. I know the exact year because there is clear photographic evidence. Yep, we're your boobies. Class picture day was peak humiliation. I have a running theory that we're subjected to it young, so we build a thick skin. 4th grade was the year of the anthill boobies, a special window of time when boobs don't quite warrant the support of a bra, but are definitely a thing, poking their heads out to alert everyone that some changes are on the horizon. At first, my side panel cut me off here. Let me move sorry about that. Full screen. Okay. At first, my growing boobs didn't really feel like part of me. They were these strange and swollen globs of fat that were tender and sore. If I wanted to, I was able to give them a squeeze and pinch the butt of my boobs between my fingers. The origin point. I actually think bulb is the more appropriate term, a round bulbous thing taking root. Feeling the bulbs really freaked me out. If I dig around enough, I can still feel them. They still freak me out. And this is a little boob bulb, what I imagine it is, growing in there. When I laid on my side in bed at night, I could look down at my squished chest and get a sneak peek at what I'd look like with cleavage. It was both a thrilling and shocking glimpse into my life as an adult. Cleavage was mature. That thrilling sense of womanhood didn't carry over to when my boobs eventually grew in, and it was, as I was told, time to get a bra. A real one with cups and underwire, the works. My mom and I blocked off an afternoon to go hunting for the perfect bra at the outlet stores. The task was daunting and nearly impossible. Bra shopping is not fun. You inevitably end up tangled in straps and sweating, all while a stranger is coming straight at your face with measuring tape. I was a bit shocked to learn how unfucking comfortable bras are. Okay, so you're telling me everyone is wearing one of these and is happy about it? You've got to be kidding. This is the bra monster. It attacks when more than 3 bras are in the dressing room at one time. And then these are kind of a bunch of fantasy bras that I imagined. The first is a pull-up bra. It's a headband inspired by Blair Waldorf. This is the utility bra, always prepared for anything. The Medusa, ultimate protection against the male gaze. The Good Samaritan, the perfect accessory for the subway in summertime, a gift for both yourself and your neighbor. Water spritz attachment and batteries sold separately. Aquarium, giving a new meaning to breastfeeding. Terrarium, free the nipple and make sure the succulents are getting enough sun. Compost, locally grown and biodegradable. Death Grip, for the best support in this life and beyond. Doily, for an antique chic granny look. Headlights, perfect for nighttime bicycle and pedestrian commutes. Beekeeper, talk about local honey. Cookie pouch, keeps your treats deliciously gooey. Bubble wrap, the most perfect bra for your most precious cargo. Also kind of hot. Comfort food, your boobs will always feel at home in these tortellini. Bat mitzvah, supporting your boobs with gusto, and a Tiffany & Co. gift ribbon. Power source, the perfect accessory for runners or their friends who always panic when they realize they forgot to recharge. Powered by your sweat. Bagel Biddy, for the carb lover in all of us. Comes in plain, cinnamon raisin, sesame, and poppy seed. Egg bagels and gluten-free options available upon request. Shaving cream, a childhood favorite, and the only strapless bra I've ever worn comfortably. But in the end, nothing can replace the joy of going braless. Doing away with bras has made my boobs feel more like me. I don't like restrictive clothing or itchy lace, so why would my boobs? And whenever I need to run, I just hold my boobs in my hands. When I go braless at work, I feel free. And that's my piece from the boobs chapter.
I love it. I think you'll have to do, this was very much, you know, I think you'll need to do a new round of them post-pandemic of what's left of the bra.
Definitely.
When we have to leave our houses more again.
Yeah.
I love the mixture of fun and play, and also acknowledging that like everyone's had these various experiences of being like, what? How is this possible that this is the best we've come up with? How did you decide to organize the book around body parts?
Well, I felt like, the body is such a big topic to tackle, and there were different ways I could have gone about it, but I think that giving each body part its moment helped me also kind of piece by piece understand where all of these stories and judgments that I make about truly like each inch of my body, where they came from. And it was a really interesting and helpful exercise for me to really go like a head to toe scan and say, okay, like when did I start caring if my like thighs were jiggly? How did that happen? And so organizing it that way was really helpful for me to investigate, I guess, where these harmful mindsets were coming from.
And so much, it was occurring to me as I was reading it, like so much of your process must have involved looking at and painting yourself, obviously.
Yeah.
What was that? And then publishing it and showing it to others. So what was that like for you to kind of put yourself under the microscope and then have this creative process around replication?
It was so much fun. And I think what was really fun for me too is before I got into like my cheeky style and the style that's in the book, I used to do these very dainty watercolors that I still love, but that's kind of where I started. And as the book developed and as I got into painting more and more, it became fun for me to make me even more cartoonish with more hair and more character, and just kind of really like, it's so fun to paint belly rolls. It's so fun to paint hair. And I think that there was this shift in the beginning from, being really preoccupied with, am I portraying myself correctly? Do I actually have this much fat there? Am I actually thinner there? Or am I thicker or whatever? All these different things, which is part of the like obsession with how we look, I think. And once I let go of that and really had fun, it was more like body as personality and body as, so it really helped. It helped kind of take me away from being, I mean, I still have my hangups. I don't know that they'll ever go away. I'm still human, but I think it helped me kind of meet in the middle somewhere with having fun and not feeling like I have to like depict myself exactly.
I was wondering if it was, I think for so many women, we spend so much time, you know, looking closely at our bodies and critiquing our bodies, and there's this kind of constant discipline, like both a very close attention to details of ourselves and sometimes others, and kind of disciplining.
Yeah.
And I mean, your whole book is about kind of flipping that into learning to love and embrace and own your body. Was it and also I think like we try, as much as we do that to ourselves, we also are resistant often to we don't want to be defined by our bodies. Like we don't want
Yeah.
other people to kind of um, reduce us to our bodies. So was it hard to navigate that at all as you were working on this, to not kind of, to be aware that you were resisting something instead of kind of replicating it?
Yeah, I think it's really hard because it's that whole like body neutrality thing of we shouldn't even need to talk about what's there. Um, and I think for me at least, it was so important for me to have fun and find joy in it because if I'm definitely not at a place where I'm necessarily like body neutral. I definitely think that's probably ideal of just like we don't have to go there, but I do think there is something in um, like paying homage to your body in some sort of way in terms of what it can do and how it can move. Um, and it's hard. It's a good question because I think bodies are so beautiful to look at and I love painting them. Um, and I think, yeah, I mean, the book is about, me and my body. And I think that more so than kind of the look of it, it's how it makes me feel, if that makes sense. So I don't know exactly where it falls, but I think I tried this exercise brought me closer to, not necessarily defining me by my body, but just accepting like my body exists and this is how it exists.
Right, sort of the facts of it and being less judgmental. um,
Yeah.
but also you talk a lot about, as we've already said, like the kind of the joy in it, and also admit, not erasing the shame and disgust, and grossness that we all experience with our bodies as well. So that brings us back, I think, to the yentas, who I just loved. They kind of are there in the book as both your sort of touchstone and also a kind of like Greek chorus almost. um,
Yeah.
so tell us a little more about, you've mentioned that these were your friends from camp, sort of what was the role that they play in your life and in the book?
Yeah, so in my life and also just in the book because it's pretty close to reality, they kind of I think back to what we were discussing before about, not being defined by your body and not letting that kind of hold you in a certain way. I think what they help me realize in everyday situations is there's a joy in also like the disgusting bizarre things that happen. So like if something embarrassing happens, they're the first people I text. And, I'll usually wake up to some, like in the book, this is a true story. One of them woke up and sent us a photo where they thought they had developed a new birthmark on their boob, but it was just melted chocolate from what they'd eaten the night before. And there was another time where this is also in the book, or maybe it's not in the book, maybe I cut it out, but at camp, I was having like terrible diarrhea. I couldn't leave the bunk and I was so embarrassed by it. And one of my friends was like waiting for me, and I'm like, you don't need to wait for me. This is embarrassing. She was like, no, I'm going to wait for you. I'm going to go get you Pepto-Bismol. Like she gave it to me under the stall and kind of like heard me have diarrhea, which was mortifying. But it was just a thing of like, yeah, we literally all have, I mean, whoever hasn't had diarrhea, amazing for them. But I think like everyone, if you have a body, it's happened. So I think what's fun about that too, and what the Yentas really have taught me, is it's so fun to talk about all this stuff once you get over the hurdle of the shame. And I think the not talking is what piles on the shame. So if you can crack at that in any way you can, even if, again, like even if you can only talk about it with yourself and find a fun way to talk about it with yourself, I guess that's a first step maybe for some people.
Right. You have this, you talk about the Yentas at camp and everyone sort of comparing all their gross period experiences. And you have this line that I just loved where you said, together we were very gross and very powerful. And I just like, I love putting those two things together, that there's some kind of power, and it's sort of like breaking that taboo that like the grossness is not a source of, is not something that disempowers us. It actually can be a source of power if you have, but like so much of what you're saying seems to be in the book, at least, like it takes having the right people to be for a community to do that.
Yeah, I think so. And there's so much that I used to be embarrassed by, and I think with them, it's helped me not be embarrassed by it and kind of own that space. And again, if you feel like using it for power, then that's great.
So can we talk a little bit about how Jewishness relates to this? I mean, it comes into the story. Obviously, the Yentas are your friends from your Jewish summer camp, and maybe we can talk a little bit about the role of Jewish camp here also. But so we have Jewish camp, we have the Yentas, and the kind of, you know, the choice to call that, for that group to call themselves that. And I'm just curious how you see Jewishness kind of intersecting with this process of coming to love your body, and where, you know, where the Jewishness and the womanness intersect. Like whether you, I guess another way to say it is like, you know, do you think that there are particular ways that Jewish culture shapes your experience of your body as a woman?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if it's Judaism in particular or the value of community that is inherent with Judaism, which might be more the thing. But I think, I mean, food is a big one. I think Jewish culture has a really beautiful way of celebrating food. And I think that when you're, and it's a really tricky thing, because I think when you're in a place where you have a really tough relationship with food, it's really difficult. And I think for me, I don't know, I've never actually been to a mikveh, but I grew up in Jewish day school and I learned about all of these different rituals. And I think, you know, the shower house at camp is probably the most similar to that. But I think that kind of translates to like the dressing room at a JCC. That's when I first saw like adult women, real boobs that were like saggy or little, or, you know, I think that's
I'll intersect another reference to that you probably don't know, but I'm sure some in our audience do, which for me, it was like the dressing room at Loman's, the old style dressing room of like a group dressing room, and everyone just strips down and is like commenting on each other's clothes, how they look.
Yeah, totally. And I think, so I don't know, I mean, it's been a while since I've been like immersed in Jewish studies, so I don't know if specifically it's Judaism, but I have such a special relationship with at least Jewish culture. And I personally feel like there's such a focus on community that I think really benefits from this type of conversation.
Yeah. And I think there's also so many ways, and you talk about this in the book, like the ways that, you know, things can be shameful, but they can also give you a certain closer awareness of your body, right? So like I think about this in Jewish culture with things like mikvah, which some people experience as empowering and some people don't. Mm-hmm. And some of the things that sound ridiculous about certain Jewish practice, like the idea that someone might show their underwear to the rabbi to find out whether something on it is period blood, that probably seems crazy to people. Well, to most people. But also, like my dissertation is about the women's health movement. And I was writing about a lot of Jewish women who were leaders in the women's health movement. I was trying not to write about their Jewishness, and in my dissertation, I mostly failed, but now I run the Jewish Women's Archive. So I clearly, you know, somehow brought myself back to that topic. But it was really interesting to think about, like, why were there so many Jewish women who were able to be having these conversations? Was there something about Jewish culture and Jewish families that made more space for doing this kind of body work? And I don't really have an answer to it, but I think it's kind of an interesting question about where are those spaces that create that kind of community that you're identifying as being really important to at least being able to open that conversation and kind of ground yourself in some of this.
Yeah, totally. No, I'm remembering back to like Talmud classes where they would talk about like tamen, tahor, and all of, and I'm like, I guess we're talking about periods in the middle of the school day. But yeah, I wonder, I totally see that, it's science, it's body, like it's just a fact that it happens.
Right, exactly. And it's totally culturally contingent, like whether we think of those things as embarrassing or natural or a source of power or a source of shame. And much of the time it's a lot of those things together. And I think that's part of what you're like trying to unravel is why we experience things with certain valence in certain contexts, and like how can we try to shift that context so that we don't always experience it in a negative way, or so that we can reclaim it, or feel more comfortable taking up space.
Yeah.
We had a couple of questions about about the term body neutral that you used earlier, and whether you can define that a little bit.
Yeah, I think I first heard it from, maybe it was Jamila Jamil who was talking about it, but just this idea of, the body positivity movement is sometimes like a difficult thing to fully embrace, of like body positivity, but also body neutrality is kind of this answer to it, in a sense of saying like we shouldn't have to be thinking about our bodies all the time. Like our bodies don't need to define us. Our bodies don't need to be like so front and center, I think is kind of how I would define it. But I'm not the expert on that. But
yeah, I mean, I think also one of the things that you write about really beautifully is that this is a process, and we're never going to feel one way about our bodies all the time. Like you can intellectually want to be positive and feel great about something, and you're never going to feel that way all the time, because as you said, like we're humans, and we're also like super bound by culture. So we can, like, one of the things you write about in the book is that you grew up with a mom who was like really open about talking about this stuff and really positive, and yet somehow you still, as you got older, felt more and more ashamed and uncomfortable, and like where did that come from? And it's like, oh right, culture is like in our heads all the time, and we can't extract it just because we want to. It's like a constant process, and we need our people to help us do that. But one of the things that I love is that in the book you sort of you call that question, and I think it's in a part where you're talking about pubic hair actually, and you say, can I, is it okay to be a feminist and also still like really not be psyched to have pubic hair sticking out of my bathing suit? And I think you say like, can I still feel like a feminist and bash the bush? And I think, which I love how you put it, but I think like we all have those processes that were the normative things that we still feel comfortable with, and we don't have to reject all of them, and we can figure out like when it's okay to be comfortable and when it's okay to push ourselves out of our comfort zone.
Yeah, and I think the point of it all is just we should just talk about it, because I don't think we can ever, like, we're not existing in a vacuum, like you said. So I think, the goal is just to talk more about it, and even talk about if you're feeling ashamed about something, that's okay. And talk about, I'm feeling really embarrassed by XYZ, and someone else probably is too. And so at least then you don't feel alone in the embarrassment. And then it can be kind of, I mean, when I get embarrassed by something, I'm like, oh, I probably should write about this at some point. Like there's something there to talk about that could be funny.
Right. And you say, that at least just asking the question and having people to talk about it with, like, it creates the space, I think, for people to then, evolve or explore different perspectives, or be reminded of something, or, just kind of, it creates more room for change.
Yeah, I think so.
To shift a little bit, I'm curious about your artistic process. Like you have some little hints in the book. You start the book by, having a picture of yourself sort of ready to make art, and you have your little thing of snacks, and you're watching TV while you're painting. But tell us a little bit about how you go about, I mean, I just was struck by, the book is so lush with paintings. It was kind of overwhelming to think of how much work you had to do to put this together.
Yeah, it was definitely a lot of work, but it was really fun. But my process usually, I mean, for the book, it was really interesting because I'd never written a book before. And so it kind of like some chapters were ones where I knew, I would write it first or get the outline down first. And I knew exactly where, or not exactly, but I knew pretty much where I wanted to go with it. And then I would look at what I'd written as an outline or even like written paragraphs that I liked and figure out what imagery would work best. And then there were other chapters where I, really didn't know where to start. And I started with like images that I thought would be really fun. Um, like in the boobs chapter, there's a spread where it's just like a bird's eye view of like two humps of boobs that I always knew I wanted. So when you look down, you could see them. And I think that was an example of there's sometimes where just images would pop up and I'm like, oh, that has to go somewhere. Um, so yeah, it was kind of like a back and forth writing and illustrating kind of project. And the way I usually will work is I'll like sketch out some ideas small, either in a notebook with a pen or with pencil. And then I paint with gouache, which is like a thicker, more opaque watercolor. And so once I kind of figure out the drawing, I transfer that, I trace it onto watercolor paper. And that's when it's really fun because I can kind of zone out. And so that's when I put on a TV show or a podcast and grab snacks and kind of go to town with it. So that's pretty much the process for me.
Do you have particular artistic influences? In particular, we have a question about your relationship to other Jewish women who have done graphic work, Aline Kaminsky, Lydia Davis, et cetera, Leila Corman.
Yeah, actually, all of those people I love. And I think that my particular influences, I think for the majority, Myra Kalman is one of my absolute favorites, and I think she's the first person whose work I looked at and was like, oh, I can write and paint. And I think that she's always been a huge influence on my work. And I think tied to that too is Henry Matisse, and I see a lot of Henry Matisse in her work. But that's definitely where like my color palettes mostly come from. That's what I'm most drawn to. I also really love Tara Booth's work. She is an illustrator that I think the first that I saw that did a lot of like diary type work with herself and her body. And so she was always really inspiring to me and continues to be. And Lisa Hanawalt is one of my favorites too. Yeah, so those are like my heroes.
And you had a couple places in the book where you like specifically had references to Matisse. I didn't pick up the other ones, but it's great to know that there's like a long history of Jewish women artists behind you.
Yeah.
We had Myra Kalman actually on our quarantine book talks about a year ago.
Oh, really? That's awesome.
For the version she did of Gertrude Stein, the autobiography of Gertrude Stein. I mean, of Alice B. Toklas by Gertrude Stein, which was great. And Mickey just put in the chat an article on Jewish women and comics and graphic narratives. So,
oh, I'll read that. That's awesome.
Lots more for people to explore. Yeah. I know that you have a day job and do illustrations for lots of other places that are not your own work. How, if at all, is it different for you? Is your art making different when it's, you're doing a freelance project than when you are the subject?
Well, I haven't I actually left my day job recently to I think I hit exhaustion and I'd been at that job for like 7 years. So I was ready to fly on my own. But a lot of the work that I do, I kind of try and keep somewhat narrative or based on my own life. And I haven't done a bunch of freelance work in a while that feels kind of distant from it. So yeah, I think I just always like to put a narrative spin on things and kind of bring my own viewpoint to things. Yeah.
I saw that you had collaborated with some what seemed to be sort of relevant brands like Lunette Cup and Luna Pads and things that are menstrual products or menstrual related companies.
Yeah. So for those, I kind of will think of a scenario that we all kind of maybe have experienced, like I'm not wearing the right like pad, or I need another tampon, and I'm sitting at a desk at work and I hope I didn't leak on the chair. So I kind of think about, again, it stems from maybe a personal experience I've had or something that I feel like is ultimately really relatable for most people. Um, and that's kind of how I approach most projects too. Like for the New Yorker, anytime I pitch something to them, it's something that I feel like we're all kind of going through in some way. Because I think it feels personal in the moment, but then once I start working on it, it becomes clear that it's definitely something other people feel too.
Yes, I loved your quarantine sweatpant styles. Which brings me actually to another topic I wanted to talk about, which is the pandemic. Your book came out in the middle of it, but also I think it's a time when for many of us, our relationship to our bodies has been changing, whether it's because we're just sitting on the couch with our bodies all the time, or we're eating differently, we're wearing only sweatpants, we're changing our grooming habits, we're always on Zoom and looking at our like saggy necks or whatever it is. So how have you been, I mean, I know that the work, because I follow your work, I know that you've addressed some of this, but how are you seeing the pandemic impacting both the subject of your work and your own relationship with your body and your work?
Yeah, I think like the biggest thing is just this. I was coincidentally single when I wrote Cheeky, so it was very like, this is just me, this is how I am with my body, this is my time, this is how I'm using my time. But I think, I mean, for some, I'm in a specific place in life where I don't have kids to take care of. I don't have a family to look after or contribute to, really. So I think for people in that similar space and time, I can only really speak to that experience, though I'm sure people who are parents also, had a shift in their relationship with their body. But you're just kind of in it by yourself in a certain way. And I know for me, I think with food also, in the beginning of the pandemic, my mom she called me at like 7 a.m. on March 15th and was like, I'm coming to get you. And she drove from Massachusetts to come get me. And I was at home with my mom and my sisters for the first 6 months of COVID in my childhood home. And we were all like turning to like Cheez-Its and like Apple Jacks and all these kind of comforting foods from childhood that usually my relationship coming home, like from college, when I came back home for vacation, I was coming back with such a restrictive mindset about the foods that I was allowed to eat. And coming home was stressful for me because here I am now in a land where I'm not buying the food and it's around, and my sisters made brownies and then I got mad at them, and all of this tension around food. And now in a pandemic, it's like kind of the only fun thing to do sometimes and the only variation that we get. And so I personally have like really, because even as much as I would say I've kind of conquered most of my eating stuff, the pandemic had showed me how much I still had left to go. Like now I allow myself to like have cartons of ice cream, and not just one flavor, but many, because why not? And I'll get ice cream cones to put them in. And I think I'm definitely having a lot more fun with food. I'm still afraid of cooking full meals, but I like make fun snacks and do different combinations. And I think the food has been a big one for me. And I think like body hair is just flowing. There's like nothing, absolutely nothing happening. And it's nice. I'm just not thinking about it. And that definitely frees up some of my brain. So that feels good.
Yeah. And it's great to like have a lens for talking about that. I was thinking about your book because I was preparing for this, and we had just posted earlier this week on Facebook a picture of this Indian Jewish painter named Amrita Sher Gill, and because she was born in 1913 on January something, so it was her birthday. And it was this picture of her like spread out like this, and her armpits weren't shaved. And it was just like so beautiful. It was just like she's gorgeous and she's lying in the sun. And I was like, oh my God, we never see photographs of beautiful women with like tufts of hair coming out of their armpits.
Yeah.
And as someone who often doesn't shave, I was just like, that's amazing. And the fact that it like occurred to me, like I noticed it because it's so rare. And just thinking about like, what is the reckoning going to be when
I know
we all reemerge, and you know, when we're talking about the new normal and the new normal when it comes to bodies, and I think there's so much around that here. Like we'll put some links at the end, but there have been a lot of really interesting things that a lot of our teens have been writing about this, and our staff have been writing about this, these questions about, you know, inhabiting a bigger body if we gained weight during the pandemic, or, you know, how we see ourselves. And I guess my point is just there's going to be a lot, there will be many opportunities for conversations that your book can help facilitate. And
I hope so.
I'm excited for that.
Yeah.
I had another question for you. Oh yes, the other thing that was related to this, you were talking about sort of some of the control that we held on to during the pandemic, or maybe gave up. And I was thinking about the fact that your body, your book talks about the unpredictability of bodies a lot, period leaks, pooping, other things like that. And I'm curious whether exploring that sort of unpredictability in the context of bodies, whether you feel like that's helped you kind of explore, you know, kind of deal with the general unpredictability of life, which I think is so blatant right now.
Yeah, I mean, I wish I could say it has. I'm like, I keep having to remind myself that I don't have control, and it's okay. And I think that, I think what's hard is it's happening so outside of myself is how it feels. I'm not so much a go with the flow person. I think I'm like holding on to that really hard. And it's really difficult to, if you're a control person, to let things go right now. I wish it had prepared me more, but I think I'm trying to make sense of things all the time.
Yeah. Well, maybe it's that we have to start in some one contained area to explore that, and that helps us build those muscles that we can then someday apply more broadly. But we have to start somewhere. What are you working on now?
So I have a newsletter that I've started called Snack Time. And that's where I have a big dream of doing some sort of cookbook, but a cheeky take on a cookbook. So it's, you know, weird food combinations and essays about, you know, going to the grocery store with an idea in mind and failing, and kind of, because I'm obsessed with the Food Network. I watch cooking shows all the time, but I famously don't cook much, and I get really intimidated by cooking. And I think I kind of apply a similar like perfectionist approach that I used to apply to my body. So I think it could be really fun to do some sort of food and body type cookbook for not cooks or something. But anyway, I have this new newsletter called Snack Time where it's mostly food related stuff, but once in a while it's, you know, the meltdown of the day gets in there. And so that's where I'm doing a lot more writing and basically giving myself room to kind of figure out what big projects are next.
That makes sense. Are you seeing other kinds of ways that to get back to the Instagram question that we were talking about early on, because I was thinking about, you know, the kind of different formats in which people have these conversations. And Substack is definitely one of the places now where there's lots of opportunities. I was thinking about Instagram also because my daughter is a freshman in high school here in Newton, Massachusetts. And she was telling me that there is I think it's an Instagram account, maybe it's TikTok, but I think it's an Instagram account at her school called Caught Pooping. And if someone poops in the bathroom, people take a picture of the shoes of the person in the stall and post it.
Oh my God.
I know, isn't that like
Is
the
this
worst?
like a fun thing or to embarrass
No,
them?
to embarrass them.
Oh my
And I
God.
was basically like, I feel like they need to read this book and have some kind of school-wide like,
Yeah.
project about it. So I was thinking about that being
Oh
like
man.
not a great use of Instagram.
Oh, that
Or,
I thank God I didn't have Instagram in high school.
yeah, I think
Oh.
I feel that way. But I was thinking, it made me think about the ills of these platforms, but also that like something like that could be flipped, right? I was like, we need a response to that Instagram that somehow decouples the shame piece
Yeah.
from it.
Yeah. I mean, it's not suitable for school stuff, but the way to flip it, I think, would be like taking a selfie on the toilet and being like, I'm pooping right now. But,
Right. Exactly.
but I think, but that's kind of like how, yeah, I think that would do it probably. Um, but it's easy for me to say because I would illustrate it. But if that's a pretty vulnerable, daring thing to do. So,
Right. Yeah.
but I encourage it.
Yeah. Um, well, we have a comment here that we look forward to as you continue to age, the different chapters to go through. But I recommend this book for people of all ages because I think that we can all learn from that process. I was definitely thinking in my own mind, if I were an artist, I would add a chapter about chin hairs because that is definitely one of the hair places that comes up as you get older. And I'm sure lots of people in the chat could add their own favorite topics to be addressed at a future date. I want to address the comment also about this being an unlesbian conversation. I think, it may be that for some of us, shaving under our arms is more acceptable, and for some it's more unusual. I think, the larger point, I think, is just about like there are different norms in different communities, and we're all shaped also by the cultures that we live in, and sometimes by the subcultures that we live in too, whether those are Jewish or by different identity groups. And I think just that whole question of like, how do we even think about what is normal and the ways in which our bodies so often go outside of the boundaries that we might want to keep them in. I think that crosses lots of different kinds of styles of body hair, of different norms around how we different cultural norms about menstruation, about eating, about all kinds of things. So I certainly don't mean to frame it as one in one particular norm.
Yeah, and I think when I was writing the book, I kind of had this reckoning of like, okay, I'm writing this book about bodies and how to I didn't want to be like, telling people how to do something and prescriptive about it, but I had this reckoning of like, I'm coming from a very specific viewpoint as a white, Jewish, heterosexual woman. And so I put it in my intro to the book just because I think that was a place of discomfort for me, where bodies are it's such a universal thing, but also such a personal thing. And there's no way that I'm going to get into the nook and crannies of it all, because things that I'm insecure about, others aren't, and things that I'm not insecure about, other people are. Like I never was insecure about the color of my hair, for example, but I'm sure there's people who might be for some reason, or freckles, or I don't know. There's endless possibilities, I guess.
Right. Or Judith points out in the chat that 50 years ago, this book might have talked a lot about a Jewish nose, and it doesn't anymore.
Yeah.
Right? That's not as much a part of the conversation.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah. But right, these things are, on the one hand, very idiosyncratic and subjective, and all we can do is talk about our own experiences. But I think that there are universal points to make as well. One of our most read pieces at JWA is about Jewish hair, interestingly. And so we've done a lot of thinking about that, like why it is that topic is so always gets a lot of attention. And we actually did a podcast episode about Jewish hair and what it means and why it's even a thing, because obviously Jews have all
Mhm.
different kinds of hair. So like how is it that people know what we mean when we talk about Jewish hair? And also the ways that it gets connected to politics and personality. And, it takes on all of these different cultural meanings that go beyond the physical and go into these other realms. So it's kind of interesting to think about, and also take on racial connections too. And so anyway, I encourage people to listen to that as well. But I think that's another place where, it can be, and hair is one of the topics in your book. But, I think those kinds of issues can be a touch point, even though, as you said, people can experience them in all different kinds of ways.
Yeah.
So, are there any other questions from the audience? I know I've been doing a lot of talking. Are there any other, we talked a little bit about some of your other influences. Are there other people who are creating now, who are, young people who you see as interesting artists we should know about, who are kind of part of, these kinds of conversations or doing similar kinds of work?
I'm obviously now drawing a blank, but Tara Booth is someone who is continuously doing work now, and Lisa Hannawalt also. She created Tuca and Birdie, which is a really great show. I'm trying to think of other illustrators and artists. I'm blanking now, but I can definitely send a list.
Awesome.
Yeah.
We had a couple questions also about what you think of as like the age range for this book.
I mean, I think teens is like like maybe preteen. But I kind of envision it for, in a dream world, like groups from different generations getting together and having a conversation. Like I think intergeneration conversations about this stuff is always really fascinating, because kind of like how, it's different subcultures, there are different things that are pain points based on the time that you're, whatever age you're at, that you're grappling with something. I think each generation has their own special sensitive points too.
Right. I love the idea of an intergenerational conversation. Has anyone put together like a discussion guide or, sort of teaching tools for using it?
I have thought about putting together some sort of guidelines for a workshop that I'm still kind of tinkering with, but I think that's kind of my dream, is to have a conversation, a cheeky conversation with people from all walks of life, all ages, and all backgrounds, because I think that is what the spirit of the book is. It's to talk about, just get it all out on the table and hear from, it's the more people, the more powerful it is. Like I think, again, back to the scope of it, the goal of the book is really just to start and say, like, here, I'm laying it all out, because I think, and I saw this when I was pitching the book too, when I would start from a place of vulnerability and say, hey, this is what I'm insecure about, like an associate publisher at a publishing house would be like, oh yeah, and then this happened when I first got my period. And I think when you open the doors, it really, basically the goal is just to create a safe space for people. And I think that if there was I think that would be amazing, some sort of workshop where people could come with their friends, their family. Yeah.
Cool. Well, we may be getting back to you about that. We do a lot of interesting work that could fit into that.
Yeah, that would be fun.
Oh shoot, I just had another question that just flew out of my head, but we were talking about curricular stuff, intergenerational. I think, I mean, I think that everybody who would read this would have I can imagine that there would be different, everyone would have a story that fit. Oh, this was my question. What has the reaction been? Have there been, especially now as we're, seems like lately there's been a resurgence of book banning and other things. And that was what I was thinking about. If you were to bring this into like a middle school or, even for young teens, I could imagine some schools might be like, this is too explicit, because it talks
Yeah.
about vaginas and it shows a lot of bodies. And I'm curious if you've had any backlash or any kind of responses in that way.
Yeah, I think it really depends again on like the subculture you're part of. Like I think people who have I think who are maybe more in a liberal or kind of subculture that's more similar to mine are super into it. And I found out that a group of girls from my camp made a book club, which was really touching. And I think there are some people who like really, really love it. But then once in a while, like I try not to look at reviews really, but there was one where someone just wrote like, "This is disgusting." And I think some people just are, it's just not the time for them to be looking at this, or it's not their thing. Um, and I think, for the people who have some inkling towards it or some attraction to it, I think it can be really helpful, I think.
Yeah. Right. It's as always is with these things. I think it's often the people who are most afraid of something that probably need it the most.
Yeah. No, that's so true.
Yeah. So hopefully the book will get out there. I mean, I know it has, and so I'm really glad about that.
Thank you.
Well, Ariella, thank you so much for being with us tonight, for helping us explore what it means to live in our bodies with joy and humor and acceptance and reveling in what's beautiful and gross about them. And thanks to all of you who are here with us tonight. Thanks for your comments and questions and for being part of this community. As we already put the link in the chat, you can follow Ariella's work in her newsletter. And I also encourage all of you to explore JWA, where we have tons of content about women and our bodies. A couple of my favorite recent pieces, actually since the pandemic, one of our Teen Rising Voices fellows wrote a gorgeous piece about feeling like being in lockdown was the first time that she owned her own body, and wasn't experiencing it only through the way other people were looking at it. One of our former staff members wrote a piece about re-entering the world in a bigger body, a prayer for re-entering the world in a bigger body. And I mentioned the podcast episode about Jewish hair, and we also did a podcast episode about our bodies ourselves, which is a kind of predecessor to women exploring their bodies in a really open and deep way. My dog apparently has something to say about this as well. I hope you will all join us next week, same time, same place. Next week, we'll be talking with Rabbi Reverend Dr. Chaviva Ner David about her two recent books, her novel Hope Valley and her new memoir, Dreaming Against the Current. So hope to see you then. She will be joining us from Israel at 3 a.m. her time. So I give her props for that. And it was wonderful to be with all of you. Until next time, be well and good night. And thank you again, Ariella.
Thank you so much. This was great.
Good night.